Hey there, this is Bill. This is a time-lapse of my garage renovation I did last year. You might be thinking about renovating your garage or basement or something, and hopefully this gives you a really good idea of how much work it's going to take and maybe gives you some ideas. I would love it if this series could help encourage people to do something similar. This is part 2, where I air seal and insulate the walls. The first thing that I'm doing here is a little bit of electrical work. I'm using a 5/8 inch hole saw to cut holes through the studs so I can run conduit from the electrical panel to the back wall. I also ran low voltage cabling above the garage door for some outdoor lighting. This blue tubing here is 3/4 inch plastic conduit called ENT. I don't have any specific use for it right now, but my thinking is that it would be a ton of work to go back and do this later. So while I've got the walls open, I'm going to make the best of it. I also took the time to look at all of my existing electrical and gas lines, measure where they are behind the walls, and write it down so that in the future I can refer back to it if I need to. The other thing I decided to experiment with was running the low voltage wires for the garage door sensors and the doorbell into electrical boxes. In almost every garage door install I've seen, these wires just come straight out of the wall and it doesn't look very good. So I ran my wires closer to where they end up and put them in an electrical box, and then I painted the wall plate and it looks really nice. I'm now moving on to air sealing all of the gaps between the studs and the house sheathing, which is OSB. This is a major source of air leaks in most homes, and if the air can get into the stud bay, then it can really impact the effectiveness of the insulation. It can also cause moisture issues, either directly if wind pushes the water in through the cracks, or indirectly by way of condensation. I tried two methods of air sealing. The first was the orange expanding foam, which works really well, but it is incredibly messy. The jacket I'm wearing, it was ruined by this stuff. Once it's on your clothes, it will absolutely not come off, and it's terrible if it gets on your skin. However, that does make it really good at air sealing. The other method was standard silicone caulking, and it was definitely less messy, but I think also less effective. The expanding foam really fills in the uneven gaps and lines, so I'd recommend the foam. Just be careful with it. It's also really good at sealing electrical boxes, which the caulk can't do. I'm moving on to insulation now. This was really a breeze. It was super simple. I'm using R15 insulation on the areas with 2x4 studs and R21 insulation on the 2x6 studs. You'll see that this insulation is 8 foot tall and we have 9 foot ceilings, so I have to go back and put an extra piece of insulation onto the bottoms. My local home stores, they just don't carry 9 foot tall bats, so you just gotta deal with it, I guess. The process for getting the insulation up is pretty simple. In stud bays where there's nothing in the way, you just slap up the insulation, fluff it up a bit, and it holds itself in place. I didn't have to staple it or anything like that. In bays that have cables running horizontally, I just slit the insulation from the back with a razor blade so that it wraps around the wires. In some bays, I end up having to pull about half the back half of the insulation off and then stuffing it behind the bundles of wires and then laying the rest of the insulation on top. There's also some stud bays that aren't the standard width, and so those have to be cut down. The result of the insulation was drastic and almost immediate. You'll notice that from here on out, I am mostly working in a t-shirt rather than a big coat. And it wasn't just because I ruined my coat. I went from seeing my breath while I work to being completely comfortable. And the cost to air seal and insulate was like $300, maybe $350. And the amount of time needed for this step was maybe around 8 hours, which included having to run the conduit as well. So I guess you would say that the return on investment for time and money for this step is just absolutely worth it. In the next episode, you'll see a huge transformation when I put up the drywall. And in the upcoming weeks, you'll see me tape and mud the joints, paint and finish, replace the garage door opener, and put in awesome lighting. If that sounds good to you, and you made it this far, I hope you'll subscribe and follow along. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.